Hey everyone, this is Peter, and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. Well, my cold is getting better, but it's still not quite there, so just bear with me. After this day in history, we will move on to our story of the day, the story of President JFK, the patient-in-chief. To the American public, John F. Kennedy was the picture of youth and vigor. Tan, athletic, smiling, the very embodiment of post-war vitality. He was, after all, the youngest man ever elected president, and the first born in the 20th century. But behind that glowing image lay a very different reality, one hidden from nearly everyone, including much of his own staff. For most of his adult life, JFK lived in near constant pain, dependent on an astonishing array of drugs just to function. He may have looked like a symbol of health, but John F. Kennedy was in truth a man perpetually at war with his own body. Then we finish with today's history brief, which comes to us courtesy of Paul F. Bowler Jr. and John George's 1989 book, They Never Said It, a book of fake quotes, misquotes, and misleading attributions. And to all that celebrate, a Merry Christmas. A quick word from our sponsors. This day in history. On December 25th, 336 AD, the first recorded celebration of Christmas took place in Rome. Early Christians marked this date as the birth of Jesus Christ, blending older pagan solstice traditions with the emerging faith, setting the foundation for what would become one of the world's most celebrated holidays. On December 25, 1776, George Washington led his Continental Army across the icy Delaware River, launching a daring surprise attack on Hessian forces in Trenton, New Jersey. The victory boosted American morale and became a defining moment in the Revolutionary War. Story of the day. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born on May 29, 1917, in Brookline, Massachusetts, the second son of Joseph and Rose Kennedy, a family built on ambition, wealth, and appearances. From the beginning, young Jack, as everyone called him, struggled physically. He was a frail child, prone to illness, and overshadowed by his robust older brother, Joe Jr. At 2 years old, he nearly died from scarlet fever, and then as a teenager he suffered repeated infections, mysterious fevers, and chronic back pain. His medical file grew thicker with each passing year. One doctor wrote bluntly, "He is not robust." Still, the Kennedys were determined to make their son appear strong. Jack's illnesses were downplayed, hidden even from relatives. That habit of concealing weakness behind charm and wit would define JFK's life. At his elite boarding school, he missed weeks at a time due to stomach ailments and fatigue. At Harvard, he was hospitalized for nearly a full year with a suspected case of colitis, later re-diagnosed as Addison's disease, a failure of the adrenal glands that leaves the body unable to regulate stress and metabolism. The young Kennedy once joked that he'd written his senior thesis from a hospital bed, and he wasn't exaggerating. Despite fragile health, Kennedy joined the U.S. Navy during World War II, commanding a small patrol boat in the South Pacific, the PT-109. When his ship was rammed by a Japanese destroyer in 1943, Kennedy's heroism became legend. He swam miles through dark water, towing a wounded crewmate by his life jacket strap clenched between his teeth. The press later turned that story into one of the great wartime myths: courage, endurance, leadership. But it all came at a cost. The crash aggravated his chronic back problems, likely caused by congenital spine deformity made worse by years of illness. For the rest of his life, Kennedy's back would torment him. leading to a cascade of surgeries, braces, and powerful painkillers that defined his adulthood. After the war, Kennedy entered politics, first the House, then the Senate, and eventually the White House. To the public, he was the golden boy, handsome, athletic, and full of energy. He played touch football with his brothers, sailed off Hyannis Port, and carried himself with easy confidence. But behind the scenes, Kennedy was a medical disaster. By his mid-30s, he suffered from chronic back pain from the degenerate disc disease, gastrointestinal issues causing nausea, diarrhea, and malabsorption, hypothyroidism, severe allergies, and most seriously, Addison's disease, a potentially fatal hormonal disorder that left him weak, dizzy, and prone to collapse. His adrenal glands barely functioned, meaning his body couldn't produce cortisol, the hormone that regulates energy and stress. Without it, even a mild infection could be life-threatening. To compensate, Kennedy took daily steroid injections, along with cortisone tablets, painkillers, antibiotics, stimulants, tranquilizers, and antispasmic meds. At times, his medication list read like an inventory of a small pharmacy. One of his doctors later admitted he was the sickest man to ever hold the office of the presidency, while also looking the healthiest. In the early 1950s, Kennedy's back pain became unbearable. He could barely walk, often leaning on a crutch or using a rocking chair for relief. In 1954, he underwent risky spinal fusion surgery to strengthen his lower back. That surgery nearly killed him. The wound became infected, his fever spiked, and he went into a near-fatal coma. At one point, a priest was even called to administer last rites. When he recovered, the surgery left him in worse shape, his back stiff, and his pain constant. A second surgery in 1955 provided very little improvement. He began wearing a rigid back brace almost constantly, which years later would tragically prevent him from ducking during the Dallas shooting in 1963. To manage the agony, Kennedy turned increasingly to doctors and to drugs. By the time he ran for president, he was receiving regular injections of procaine, cortisone, and amphetamines, often administered by a shadowy physician named Dr. Max Jacobson, known in Washington and Hollywood as Dr. Feelgood. Jacobson's injections, a cocktail of vitamins, steroids, and methamphetamines, provided bursts of energy and confidence. But they also caused dangerous mood swings, insomnia, and dependency. When Kennedy ran for president in 1960, his health was one of the campaign's most closely guarded secrets. His opponent, Vice President Richard Nixon, was famously overworked and visibly tired. Kennedy's team worked relentlessly to project the opposite image: youth, energy, and strength. But in reality, Nixon was much healthier. Every photograph, every appearance was choreographed to support that illusion of JFK being young and robust. Makeup masked his sallow skin. Tanning lamps hid the pallor of steroid use. His charismatic energy, enhanced at times by amphetamines, gave the impression of tireless vigor. Behind closed doors, however, Kennedy was dependent on a small team of doctors and aides who carefully managed his symptoms hour by hour. He took steroids in the morning to raise his blood pressure, then painkillers throughout the day for his back, and then sedatives at night to sleep. According to biographer Robert Dallek, Kennedy's staff logged at least 36 different medications prescribed over his presidency. But to the public, he was still the model of perfect health, an image immortalized on television, a new medium that he mastered like no president before him. Once in office, the demands of the presidency pushed Kennedy's fragile health to the brink. Stress could send his Addison spiraling. Infections could prove lethal. Yet he rarely showed it. During the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, as the CIA-backed operation collapsed, Kennedy was running a fever and vomiting from adrenal exhaustion. At the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, when the world teetered on the edge of nuclear war, he was secretly taking steroid injections and codeine to manage pain. Despite it all, he remained sharp, calm, and decisive, a testament perhaps to his mental discipline and the precision of all that medical management. Still, inevitably, his body was breaking down. Years of steroid use caused his face to swell and his bones to weaken. Infections recurred. He experienced mood swings, depression, and severe gastrointestinal distress. To maintain appearances, his personal physician, Dr. Janet Travell, devised a regime of constant adjustments, injections, heat packs, rocking chairs, and corsets designed to hold him upright during public events. In private, the pain was so intense that Kennedy once told an aide, "If I didn't have a job to do, I don't think I could go on." Kennedy's medical records were among the first tightly guarded secrets in Washington. His doctors and family went to great lengths to conceal the truth, even forging documents to downplay his Addison's diagnosis when journalists began to ask questions. Reporters occasionally noticed his odd posture, his awkward walk, or the fact that he sometimes appeared stiff in photographs. When one magazine asked about rumors of chronic illness, Kennedy joked, "I just have a bad back, like anyone who's worked too hard." That charm, that effortless deflection, was his shield. In truth, he was living on a knife's edge, a man whose charisma and courage masked a body that could collapse at any moment. Historians have long debated whether Kennedy's illness affected the presidency. Some argue that they sharpened his empathy, that his constant pain gave him patience and humility. Others, however, believe that his dependence on stimulants and painkillers clouded his judgment at times, particularly during moments of stress. But we could probably say with some certainty that as a man, he endured what most men could not, and performed under pressure that would have broken many in perfect health. By late 1963, Kennedy's health was precarious. His back pain had intensified, his weight fluctuated. On the morning of November 22, 1963, when he arrived in Dallas, he was wearing his steel back brace, tightly cinched beneath his suit. When the first bullet struck him, that brace kept him upright, unable to fall forward, allowing the fatal second shot to hit its mark. In an eerie twist of fate, the device meant to keep him functioning may have also sealed his doom. He was 46 years old. The History Brief. The following comes from Paul F. Bowler Jr. and John George's 1989 book, They Never Said It. Thomas Jefferson once said that government is best which governs least. In his nationally syndicated column for November 11, 1987, William F. Buckley Jr. urged Republicans to remember, and I quote, "the insight of the earliest Democratic president. It was Thomas Jefferson who said that the government is best which governs least." End quote. Buckley was quoting one of the most popular Jefferson sayings in circulation, but the sage of Monticello did not, in fact, ever make that remark. It appears in the first sentence of Henry David Thoreau's famous essay on civil disobedience, first published in 1849, but it is not by any means Thoreau's statement either, for he put quotation marks around it, as if it were an old saying that he himself did not know the origin of. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and making this humble little show such a success. If you guys want to email me, you could do so at peter@historyshortspodcast.com. You could also visit www.historyshortspodcast.com or look for History Shorts on X, Facebook, and Patreon. Have a great rest of your day, Merry Christmas, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.